Cooking is the story of history because the dishes that we eat and love and serve have been formed because of historical events that have moved people around and moved crops around. And that is very much the case with the dish that I'm going to make today, Rappie Pie, because its history actually dates to one of the darkest times in Canadian history, and we are going to talk about it because this is the story of the Acadian Expulsion and how it relates to Rappie Pie. Now there's two different kinds of Rappie Pie. There's the Rappie Pie that's from Nova Scotia and the Rappie Pie that's from New Brunswick. The one I'm going to be making is Nova Scotian. And the Nova Scotia one differs in that it's a bit more liquid. It's not quite as firm as the New Brunswick one. The New Brunswick one could be described more as a casserole than anything else. But both of these Rappie Pies trace their origin to this very dark period in Canadian history, the Acadian Expulsion, which happened over 250 years ago and led to thousands of deaths. Now, in about 1754, the Acadians, who had lived in the areas of New Brunswick and Nova Scotia for generations by that point, they were told that they had to swear an oath to the British Crown, or they would be evicted from their land. And most of the Acadians decided that they were not going to swear an oath. And that led to their expulsion. Now, in the expulsion, about 11,000 of 14,000 Acadians were kicked off of their land, and of those, 5,000 died of disease, starvation, and shipwrecks. Now, a lot of these Acadians were sent to areas such as England, back to France, and the area that would eventually become the eastern seaboard of the United States. And it was in the eastern seaboard of the United States that they started to interact with other cultures, including the Germans, and that's when they started to see what potatoes could do. And that's the origin of Rappie Pie. Now, even though the Acadians were working with other cultures and learning about new foods and new dishes to create, they didn't have much. They had essentially been pushed off their land with only the possessions they could carry. They had nothing when they were sent off to other lands like the northeast seaboard of the United States, or what would become the United States, and England and France and elsewhere. So they had to make do. Now, they started using potatoes, but also other things that were easy to grow and plentiful. Things like onions. Now, eventually, the Acadian Expulsion would come to an end in about 1764 when the British allowed the Acadians to return back to their farms and their land. But they weren't able to actually do that because all of their land had actually been taken by British settlers. So the Acadians returned to Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, but they brought with them these new dishes that they've been creating in the places where they were forced to live for several years. And that's where we start to get the origin of Rappie Pie. Now, the Acadians had to look for a new place to live because their old homes were now gone. And they were not left with some great choices. The land that they were left with was rocky and very sandy and wasn't great for growing big crops, but it could grow potatoes. And that's where they remembered all those dishes that they used to make when they were pushed off of their land. So they started to grow potatoes and onions, and then they started to harvest whatever livestock they could to help make these dishes. And one of the animals that they used was chicken, and that is exactly what I'm using in my own dish. And there you have it, Rappie Pie, a dish that was created out of the Acadian Expulsion 250 years ago, and is now something widely enjoyed by people in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick.